Hello, all, and happy May the 4th, National Star Wars Day. We are so excited to welcome you to Risk Out Session, SAR Wars, Revenge of the Myths. We are so thrilled to have so many Jedi joining us from all across the galaxy today. Thank you for taking some time on this beautiful Monday. Now, before we do dive into today's content, let's run through some quick housekeeping items. RiskOut will be sharing all of today's webinar resources in a follow-up email first thing tomorrow morning, so be sure to keep an eye on your inbox. You can access all of today's webinar resources, including a copy of today's slide deck, in the top right corner of your webinar interface. We also want for this session to be as valuable for you as possible, so we encourage you to search your feelings, audience, and ask any questions you have throughout the session to our Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. We'll also be running a few polls throughout today's session to better understand you all, so your participation is greatly appreciated. In case it is your first time joining us, RiskOut is a team of BSA professionals and former bank examiners helping financial institutions prevent fraud losses and protect their communities while improving profitability. We've built a platform that we wish that we had to fight the dark side, focusing on reducing manual work, unlocking new deposit streams, and ensuring regulatory compliance, all without needing to increase your headcount. By leveraging our deep industry expertise, seamless data integrations, and intelligent automations, our comprehensive BSA, AML, and fraud platform empowers bankers to do more than less, so you can stay focused on serving your community. If you're like Princess Leia and you're thinking, help us, Risk Scout, you're our only hope in the battle against fraud and money laundering, you're in luck. Instead of sending a message droid across the galaxy, you can simply visit riskout.com and get in touch. While the new NACHA rules are already live for some, all other financial institutions will need to adopt these changes by June 22nd of this year. Many bankers are still figuring out what these changes will look like for their programs, so we pulled together a free webinar and downloadable checklist to help you understand what changes are coming, how you need to adjust, and guidance for how to do so. We know the force is strong with your program. Check out these free resources to help make your ACH transition as smooth as possible ahead of the June deadline. And if you want those links, you can find them right now in the chat box. Today's webinar will be led by Kristen Parker, RiskOut's Senior Vice President of Compliance and Operations. Kristen is a seasoned expert in BSA, AML, and fraud prevention with extensive experience building and implementing monitoring programs for higher risk industries. She's contributed to significant updates in the FFIEC manual, provided practical and risk-based AML guidance at industry events, and played a key role in the development of RiskOut's innovative and actionable BSA and fraud solutions. Kristen has also been recognized by her peers as PBC's 2024 Compliance Person of the Year and has recently been rumored to have joined the Rebel Alliance and may or may not be training with a small green Jedi Master on the swamp planet of Dagobah. Again, unconfirmed rumors, but maybe Kristen will shed some light there. We are so excited to have her joining us today. And Kristen, without further ado, I'll go ahead and throw it over to you to dive into today's content.
Why, thank you, Ethan. I am so excited to be here. I am in a galaxy far, far away from my normal spot of doing these webinars today. We are in Charlotte for the ABA conference, and we're really excited to be here. So I'm joining you from a new era of the webinar land I usually exist in. Today's agenda, we're going to talk through a recap of the original trilogy that the other webinar we've done. I guess this is the sequel to the prequel now, right, Ethan? We're going to go through a little bit of that. Any good sequel always recaps the prequel. The Revenge of the Myths, we're going to talk about what the myths are around SARS and what exists in that space. We're going to talk about partnering with law enforcement. We're going to do a little Q&A and some final thoughts as well. So let's kick it off, Ethan. All right. So, anytime that we are dealing with in the space of BSA and anything, even fraud, we are always dealing in a should we report this or should we not report this? And there's a whole lot of myths. There's a whole lot of myths that come from just misinterpreting what the guidance actually says. There's a whole lot of myths that exist because I'm just doing it the way that someone else taught me to do it. Maybe that person didn't quite understand what some requirements are and what things like that. So we are here to just strike back against the myths, set everybody on the same page about what is and is not required of you, uh, things along those lines. So let's go ahead and get kicked off with just recapping what we originally went through on the first webinar. The first thing that we did go through and are laying groundwork today for is what is a SAR? What is a SAR? Why do we have to do them? A SAR is a suspicious activity report. If you're here, you probably already know that, but it is a great reminder that there are certain requirements, certain events that can happen at your institution that you do need to fill out a suspicious activity report. And then we're going to talk more about what happens to that report after it is submitted here shortly. It is a report. It's a regulatory filing to flag suspicious transactions or activity to FinCEN. It's a tool that is used as a detection to help us be able to kind of thoughtfully inform law enforcement on what we feel is suspicious to potentially support them in an open investigation that they're doing. It is our whole point is to be helpful for law enforcement when they are attempting to investigate something. So it is either they may have already have an open investigation that they're going to be utilizing your SAR for, or maybe this is the first time they're hearing of this type of activity and it's hitting some keywords that they care about to investigate. We'll talk more in depth about what that process is like here shortly. The biggest thing we talked about in that original SAR Wars was how to really creating what is an effective SAR. There's a SAR best practices downloadable, I believe, that we have for this webinar that really walks you through crafting a SAR narrative to be as effective as possible. There's a lot of these check the box options and things that we have to fill out as part of the SAR form in general, but where the juicy stuff comes into play, the stuff that law enforcement cares about, is really what is written in that narrative section of that SAR that makes them want to read it, right? It makes them want to say, no matter the dollar amount, I want to look at this because it is using keywords. There's a good story being told here. So if you'll go back and watch that original webinar and then download that SAR narrative best practice, that's where we go through really how to craft a very effective SAR narrative. And this all comes from experience that I've had on my own. I've spent many, many years in the chair that you guys are in. I had a very, very good track record of writing effective SARs that law enforcement wanted to engage with me and my team on because we had a method to the madness about how we wrote it. And it was really about telling a compelling story. And if you can't capture the law enforcement's eyes in the first two sentences, if you can't catch them with something gripping, they may just completely move on. And I think it's also really helpful, and it was really helpful for me to know when I did a conference with some law enforcement and some BSA folks back when I was still learning this field, is that when law enforcement actually accesses these suspicious activity reports, they don't see them in the format that in which we are filling them out. They see them as one long text string. So depending on how long your narrative is, it could be, as long as one block of down or uptown Charlotte, or it could be miles long, depending on what you've written. And so the way they're getting this is in not a lovely format. So when the compelling part of your story doesn't come till later down in your paragraphs, then they're not going to waste their time trying to read through that whole thing trying to find it, right? They catch them in the first two sentences. So go back. I encourage you to go back and watch that original SAR Wars, because it talks about how to write compelling ones so that you aren't just sending stories that really should have the attention of law enforcement into, about a black hole potentially, because you're not catching them in a way that really engages them.
That's great, Chris. And just to add to that, that SAR narrative guide is available right now in that downloadable section. If you click up in the top right corner, as well as our slide deck from that our original SAR Wars session, we'll be sending out that recording in our email afterwards. So thank you for calling those out. All right, that does bring us to our first poll question of the day. This should be popping up on your screen now, asking, on average, how long does it take your team to complete a SAR from start to finish? We know that these can vary widely depending on depth, how much data is available, you name it, how big your team is. So we're curious from the folks that we've got joining us today, where are you falling? Anywhere from under half an hour to all the way up to over 3 hours. We would love to hear from who we've got with us today. Give y'all just a couple more seconds to get these answers in. Gosh, y'all are quick. That was faster than 3 parsecs. That was so great, y'all. Let's turn around these results. Okay. Looks like we've got the majority of our audience clocking in there around the 1 to 3 hour mark. 48% of our folks on the call today, followed not too far behind by 36% saying about half an hour to 1 hour long. Really only on the edges, we've only got 4% of our audience that are taking less than half an hour, 12% taking more than 3 hours. Kristen, in your experience, how does this kind of stack up to what you were expecting to see today?
Yeah, I would say if this is what you're saying is actually taking you to complete a SAR form, maybe you've already done your investigation and all that, then, and you're just trying to craft that story together, I would say that 30 minutes to 3 hours time frame sounds about right if you are writing your first, SAR together and it's well thought out. Now, in Risk Out, our users have the ability to have templates built in for their SARs. And so we try to really help them get into the habit of using a good, effective SAR narrative so that when they go and complete that SAR the first time, it's well thought out on kind of helping them craft that story so they can do it much quicker, which buys them a lot of efficiencies. So, yeah, I mean, it's really depending on what story you're actually telling. If it's just, kind of a one-off shorter situation, I think 30 minutes is actually pretty reasonable. If it's one that you're trying to craft a compelling story for, they sometimes can take longer to do. So, the whole point in us doing SARs, it's really interesting because I talk to institutions every day, all over the U.S. and of varying degrees of asset sizes. I'm talking 10 to $20 million in assets to $20 billion in assets. And it's really funny to me that the institutions that are like, when we go to talk about the suspicious activity reporting, and they're just like, some of them are just so grumbly, right? Like, oh, that's just something we have to do. And others are more like me, who's just like, yeah, I love to do that. That's the whole point of the majority of what we do and what our mission is in BSA is to be able to aid law enforcement in helping detect and report suspicious activity, right? So I think it's good, just a reminder for us to just say, we're here as BSA professionals and even fraud professionals and whatever profession you're in to protect our institution against bad actors, against those that may be trying to defraud our own either employees, us as a company, or especially our customer base or our member base. That it's our job to help aid in protecting that, and then also aid law enforcement in helping them detect suspicious activity, helping them know what's going on in their community about what are you seeing at your institution? What are people being caught off guard with? What are people being frauded with? What kind of money laundering potential issues are in this community? And that's where that engagement with law enforcement is really, really important. And we touch a lot on that in the original SAR, but I think it's good just to go back down to the basics and say, we're here to help protect our grandmas. We're here to help protect your neighbors and your own selves and your institution against suspicious activity. And then we've got to be able to tell that story when the thresholds are met, which we'll go over more in just a second. We've got to be able to tell an effective story, because that's, at the end of the day, what we're here to do as BSA professionals is to be able to detect and report suspicious activity. There's a lot of SAR statistics that exist out there. We continue to see them climb year over year. 2023 and 2024 kind of leveled. They kind of leveled off. We don't have 2025 stats yet, but I would say that as the crimes become more sophisticated of varying degrees, we're seeing that increase. We're also seeing advisory memos from FinCEN saying, hey, we want you to look for these very specific things, and if you find them, please add those keywords. This is how we would like you to help us notify through your narratives in the SARs about this type of activity. So the pressure is still remains on those financial institutions to be able to detect and report suspicious activity, and it is not let up at all. If anything, it has become more increasingly the pressure there. Just, I feel like every couple weeks we're getting some new direction from the Department of Treasury that says, hey, we're seeing these things. We want you guys to help us look for these. And I think it's just really important to remember that it doesn't matter the size of your institution. I really have always believed, and I know this because I worked in smaller institutions, is that sometimes the bad actors oftentimes target smaller institutions because they don't think you guys are sophisticated enough to be able to detect and report suspicious activity. So it doesn't matter your size, and I don't care if you feel like you know all of the communities in which everybody who banks with you. You would be very surprised. We work with a lot of smaller institutions who are like, no, I went to high school with everybody that banks here, and I know everything about everyone. And then when we go to turn on, because they were manual, a lot of them were manual based programs or had older software, and we go to turn on the agents to look for suspicious activity, and they're starting to learn a lot about who's in their community and what they're actually up to. So it's one thing to think it's not happening in my backyard. It is, and it's still your responsibility to detect and report that. All right, so let's get into the myths. I think we have about 7 myths here listed, and so we're going to go through each of these and thoughtfully kind of just talk through what we hear a lot of and then why it is or is not true. I would believe that this number one myth is what I hear out of people all the time, especially folks that maybe have taken the BSA role who just haven't been in this space before. Maybe someone retired and then they were the teller who drew the short straw and is now the BSA officer, and they don't quite understand what their responsibilities are. So myth number one states, I have to file SARs for any dollar amount, and that is simply not true. In addition to that, we also hear a lot, if it is structuring, if it is anywhere in cash activity that's close to $10,000, that's structuring, and that you have to file on that no matter what. So part one of this says no, you actually, that's not true in regards to you have to file for any dollar amount that you find suspicious. You certainly can, but that can become unsustainable, right? And so we do have thresholds that have not been updated since the origination of the BSA law that came out. So you still, anything $5,000 or more where you have identified a suspect, you need to file a SAR on that. That is not just related to money laundering. If you look at a SAR form, you have elder abuse, you have fraud, you have all varying degrees of things that you should be filing on. So if you are having suspicious activity of any varying degree at your institution that is greater than $5,000, it is your duty to report that in a suspicious activity report. It's $25,000 when you do not have a subject. So that means maybe you just have some broad fraud ring or maybe a cyber related crime and you don't know exactly who's doing it, and you don't have anybody to fill out in that subject form. Those are less effective for law enforcement, so that threshold is higher and it's set at $25,000. If you're an MSB, it's $2,000 for any suspicious activity, just because they deal with a lot of lower dollar volume. If it is insider abuse, meaning something that is happening at the institution with employees, as no dollar amount. you need to tell on those employees, and there's you need to tell the story of the situation that's happened, and it could be a $1 issue. It could have been a no loss issue to the institution. It could be varying degrees of things. But if you have insider abuse happening, you do need to report that for any dollar amount. And in 2025, in October 2025, FinCEN did this courtesy of confusing a lot of people through a memo guidance that kind of contradicted itself in and out of throughout that memo, in my opinion. And I've heard that from a lot of other people, including regulators. But one of the things it did confirm, which was a refreshing thing, was that, you know, a one-time incident of maybe it's somebody ill-informed on what CTRs are actually about, and they sell their car and they come in and they deposit $9,500, and then they come in and maybe a week later make a $500 deposit. That equals $10,000. Are they trying to structure? Do they have anything nefarious actually happening there? You know, that's a gray area of where a lot of regulators have historically said, no, you need to file on that no matter what, because that's structuring. What that guidance said was that just because it is around 10K doesn't mean it's necessarily structuring unless it's accompanied with other suspicious activity. And a lot of times it is somebody who is, you know, just doesn't want another government report filled out on them, so they do something silly like I just explained, and historically that's gotten them in more trouble than it has helped them because we've had to file suspicious activity reports. But just know there is some gray area in there now where you don't necessarily have to file on that. Now, if it is explicitly stated in your policy that you do that, then yeah, you still need to do that. And maybe it's worth considering updating your policy. But a one-time event with no other surrounding suspicious activity does not actually require a SAR anymore. So my advice is to use risk-based judgment. Just don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Document why you didn't file just as carefully as that reason that you did file.
Hey, Kristen, before we move on to myth number 2, we did have a question come in. You know, these thresholds make sense, but are there thresholds for how much information is needed to consider someone as a fully identified suspect? For example, if I only have first and last name, is that sufficient? Do I need more? How does that kind of play out in your experience?
That is considered a subject. So if you have a first and last name, that is a subject. Now, obviously, the additional information is obviously helpful. If you had an address, date of birth, any of those types of things are helpful. But if you have a first and last name, that is a subject, and that does fall within the $5,000 range.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Let's move to number.
Ethan, back up just a second.
Let's see.
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry. I thought we missed one. All right, myth number 2, my SARs never get read. Well, that's true if you're writing boring SARs. It just is a lot of what we believe happens to our SARs is that they actually go into a black hole. And no, maybe your SAR doesn't need to be super sexy for that to be read if it falls into certain categories, but there's actually a whole diagram, which I believe is what's on the next slide, that kind of just, and we'll go over in just a second, to show you kind of the life cycle of what happens with a SAR. So the truth of it is there are actually over 350 agencies that have access to the SAR database. And so when they originally come in and they are submitted by us, they go to FinCEN, and then they live in that portal at FinCEN, and all of the different agencies can access that. And so while it may not be read right away, there could be an open investigation that happens years later. And let me tell you something, there was nothing more satisfying to me when my gut said, something doesn't smell right here. We reported on it, and I maybe didn't hear back from law enforcement right away, but in a year or two later, I either A, we're getting subpoenas from law enforcement on that case, or B, I read about it in a newspaper, and I'm like, I knew it. So trust your gut is a big part of this, but just know that just because you aren't actively hearing from law enforcement, especially if you aren't trying to actively engage with them yourself, then it's not a black hole that it's going into. They actively use the SAR system all the time. I had a good friend that was an FBI agent, and she said they spend dedicated hours per month just combing through the SAR system. And that's not she lived in Charlotte, and that's what their objective was. There's in every city that has an agency in every state are have typically have designated hours that they are querying these SAR databases to look for either keywords or people that names that they are investigating for whatever reasons. And so these really do help. And whether it's in the short term or long term, just know that it's not going into a black hole. The journey of a SAR after submission, that's just kind of what we just touched on, is, that you guys, the financial institutions, are submitting a SAR. It goes into that database. FinCEN, oftentimes, if it does hit certain criteria or certain dollar amounts, will go ahead and disperse those to the law enforcement agencies that they believe would benefit from there. Again, they all do live in that portal, so anybody can access it, but FinCEN will go and say, hey, this one looks to be tax evasion. Let's just go ahead and put that in the IRS queue. Let's do this one locally to the FBI in this area for human trafficking potential issues. So that they will divvy and they will alert those law enforcement agencies if it is something that they are specifically focused on. And then law enforcement uses that to engage and find all of that. And so sometimes you do, we feel because we don't know it's not a closed loop system where we're always getting feedback. It can feel really discouraging, especially if you've never had engagement with law enforcement on something that you've been investigating. But there are ways to counteract the lack of law enforcement, and either that's through writing more effective SAR narratives, but also really engaging with law enforcement in an effective way, like advocating for your institution about your SARs as well, which we'll talk about more here in just a few minutes. Myth number 3, my SARs will be ignored if they have a low dollar amount or are not exciting enough. Again, I'll always harp on tell a good story in your narrative. But a lot of folks I hear from often say, hey, we don't have anything that's high dollar enough for people to care about, so they're never going to be looked at. And it's oftentimes been a myth that well, this agency never looks at anything less than $1 million. And there are, with the $5,000 threshold so low, the number of SARs, we saw it on that graph, that are being filed, they can't look at every one of them. And yeah, there are certain criterias that do say, hey, unless somebody is specifically reaching out to them and saying, hey, I have a SAR that we're about to file, please be on the lookout for it with law enforcement, then they would probably never know it's happening. So this is where it goes back to that engagement piece of things. Otherwise, they may never look at it if it doesn't reach a certain dollar amount. There's certain keywords that always get looked at no matter what dollar amount for the longest time, and I believe this is still true, is the human trafficking was any dollar amount. But again, if you feel strongly about something and you believe law enforcement should know about it, there's a reason that you build those relationships with the law enforcement agencies, so that when it comes due time for you to raise your hand and say, hey, something is not right here, that you have that you're not just relying on submitting your SAR to FinCEN and hoping somebody reads it one day. So just know that lead with behavior and context, not the size of the transactions when you're writing narratives, because the more you can use really engaging keywords, especially keywords they're looking for, the more likely you are to get engagement on those SARs.
Hey, Chris, we had a question come in. I know you mentioned that you've got a friend in the FBI, and that could be somebody that you can touch base with. If we don't have that, how should I be getting in touch with law enforcement? What agency am I reaching out to? Is there a point of contact for my institution? How do I kind of get that ball rolling?
Yeah, so you can start small, and I think we talk about more about this later, and we talk about it pretty in depth in the first webinar that we did, SAR Wars, Law Enforcement Awakens. We talk greatly about how to get engaged with law enforcement through there, and a lot of times it doesn't matter really where you're located as an institution. Your largest city near you usually has some type of law enforcement connection, um, advocacy group. So it could be that it's several different agencies together, FBI, IRS, local law enforcement, all that, all get together on some type of either once a quarter or even sometimes once a month to say, hey, what are you guys seeing? Here's what we're seeing. What are you guys seeing? And just sharing that, not sharing names of who's happening with, but trends they're seeing in the area. And that has really helped. And that's actually picked up quite a bit all over the U.S. where financial institutions are able to find that group in their city, or if it doesn't exist, starting it and then having those quarterly meetings to start with to say, hey, they're both keeping each other informed on what's going on in the community, and that can help you really cover for things at your institution that you may not even realize what was happening in your area because it hasn't hit you yet.
That's excellent. Thanks for that. All right, that does bring us to our next poll question, which you should see popping up on your screen now. I know we've been talking a lot about law enforcement. We want to know how y'all have been interacting with them around the SARs that you're filing. So when you do file that SAR, are you having that law enforcement reach back out to you? Maybe it's immediate. Maybe it's like Kristen's example where it's 2+ years down the road. We have everything from yes, you're often engaging with them, all the way down to no, or I'm just not sure. We would love to hear your responses about law enforcement interaction around your SARs. Excellent. I know they say Han drew first, but y'all are pretty quick on the draw today with these answers, so thank you for those. Let's turn them around. All right, it looks like the majority of folks on our call, 54%, have in fact engaged with law enforcement around a SAR. That's great to hear that community building there. Or twice, only 10% of our respondents are engaging with law enforcement often, whereas not engaging is 28% and just not quite sure is 9%. Kristen, does this kind of stack up to what you were expecting to see?
Yeah, it's not a surprise to me that you have. I love that you guys have heard from law enforcement occasionally. I love that number is higher than I expected it to be. The not that I'm aware of, I get that. It's not, a lot of times your subpoena department is different than what your BSA department is. And if you guys don't have that loop to, that connection or that dotted line to each other, whoever's fulfilling those subpoenas, oftentimes you don't know that you've reached out. So here's what I would do as a takeaway from this is if you are in that I'm not sure, I'm not aware category, I want you to really think about what your subpoena process is at your institution. And if you don't have a direct line of communication, there should be some type of communication that's happening between parties so that at least when the subpoena is given to an institution to fulfill, that the BSA department is always informed of that, and so that you can keep track of your law enforcement engagement. And it's also important if you haven't reported on something and you got a subpoena, it's always good to go back and look at that account to say, did I perhaps miss something? Because you're not always going to know the whole picture. And maybe something suspicious isn't actually happening at your institution, or maybe it is, and you just happen to look at it with a different set of lenses. So, and it doesn't hurt you to have kind of a post-mortem check on yourself on those situations too.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And thank you for all your answers. Let's get back to myth number 4.
Myth number 4, SAR filing timing. I hear this all the time. So many folks believe, and the majority of the time it's because this is how it's always been, and they've learned from somebody else who learned from somebody else who's been in that chair for 45 years, is that the SAR must be filed within 30 days of the transaction occurring. And that means the myth is the date the transaction occurred, that's when my SAR filing clock starts, right? That's not true. That is not true. You have time to do a deep investigation if you need to. Now, there should be criteria and ways to keep people honest that says we don't want investigations on something that we think might be suspicious going on indefinitely. That's not the intention of what this whole point is. The intention is that from the date of the transaction, there may be other things that you need to gather to determine whether something is suspicious or not. And once you have figured out and gathered that information, you should be able to deduce, do I find this suspicious or do I not find this suspicious? And if you do, and you go back to myth number one, you do find it suspicious and it falls within those thresholds that we talked about, 5K, 25K, no threshold, then that's when your SAR filing clock starts. It's 30 days if you have a subject from the date you determine it is suspicious. If you do not have a subject in your SAR, and it's at least $25,000, then you will have an additional 30 days available to you from the date you determined it to be suspicious. And the whole point in giving the additional 30 days, think about it, if you give them a little bit more time, maybe you can find a subject. Maybe you have a little bit more time to do that investigation. That's the whole point in those additional 30 days. It's not so you can just buy yourself more time. It's so that you can, okay, I can put a little bit more effort in here and trying to find out who might actually be involved in this crime. So I think that's really, really an important thing to determine here, because sometimes you can people rush these SARs out because they be like, oh gosh, I didn't realize this, and it happened 28 days ago, and it's for right at $10,000 because so I feel like I need to file a structuring SAR. And so they're just like, okay, so I'm going to write up a quick SAR and send it on because I got to check that box. No. Give yourself a little grace, do a little bit more investigation, and then if you determine it is suspicious, give yourself time to write an effective SAR narrative. You've got those 30 days to do it, sometimes 60 days. So document your decision date in the case filing. Remember, when you are documenting things, it's not just for your auditors and examiners, it's also to help you defend yourself against your own peers, right? And your decision, because we have so much going on. We oftentimes, if you're like me, you don't even remember what you had for breakfast. So like, how am I supposed to remember when somebody asks me 6 months later why I didn't file a SAR on something? I need to have that rationale and the date of my determination for that rationale clearly documented for my own memory's sake. Okay, myth number 5. Writing SARs is boring. And I just feel so sad for people who believe that, because it's one of my favorite things to do. I think in my next life, if AI doesn't take it away from me, I'm going to just go back to writing SARs full time because I loved it. It is being able to tell a story for law enforcement that is effective. Now, some SARs are just not as cool to write as others, right? If it's just, especially back when we were having to write the structuring SARs, that were just like, oh gosh, I just know this lady was just a nervous Nelly, so she did this, and now I've got to write on her. It's like, don't spend a lot of time on that. That's not helping law enforcement. But it's not just, it is the feeling of being able to tell a thoughtful story about why you determined something to be suspicious that is thought out and well thought out to help law enforcement. And so when you start to shift your mindset about the purpose of a SAR and what you're really, really trying to accomplish with it, then it becomes to kind of, you start to unlock these like superpowers of saying, I'm writing this story because I'm writing this narrative because it's a story I'm telling that's going to better help potentially protect my community, right? So read it aloud is my advice to you. If it bores you, it'll bore an investigator. So remember that when you're writing that. And so just use the secret recipe that I gave you in that SAR narrative best practices, and your life will feel much more accomplished when you're writing a SAR narrative and you're not just checking a box. All right, myth number 6. I only have to file SARs for BSA crimes. False. That is false. The truth is cyber events, elder exploitation, trafficking, insider abuse, identity theft, public corruption, and are all reportable, and FinCEN does require you to. So FinCEN has advisories for each of these. I would check FinCEN's advisories regularly. They tell you exactly what to do and how to flag them. I wish I could write them up and you guys a summary every time. There's just not enough daylight out there for me to do that. So I want you to go to the FinCEN website and I want you to sign up for their emails that they send out. And anytime they have an update or an advisory, you will get that in your email and make it a priority to read that and think about how you can incorporate whatever they are advising you on. The ones that are more complicated that you feel like you'd never deal with, if you feel like, Kristen, how would I ever be in this situation where I'd have to know at least what to look for? That no way my customers are getting into that. First of all, remember back to what I said is that there is stuff happening in your own backyard, whether you like to believe it or not. So don't ever think that it won't happen to you, because it might. And if you're in a situation where you're like, I can't figure out how I would even try to detect this, you guys have my contact information. You email me. It may take me a second to get back to you. My schedule is packed, but this is so important to me. I will take the time to get back to you on that to help you figure out how you can better monitor that. And that doesn't matter if you're a Risk Out customer or not. That's true for anybody.
All right, that does bring us to our next poll question, which you should see popping up on your screen now. And we want to know a little bit about documentation. How does your institution currently manage SAR and no SAR documentation? It can be anything from maybe you've got dedicated solutions, maybe that's provided from your core or inside of the core, maybe it's just spreadsheets or shared documents, maybe you're still doing that on paper. We would love to hear from y'all. And for those of you that have already submitted and you do want to shoot Kristen that question, her email is kristen@riskout.com. Nice and simple there. Excellent. Y'all are quick today. Thank you so much for getting those answers in rapidly. Let's see. Should be looking at the results here. Looks like almost half of our audience said, don't worry, I've got dedicated compliance software in place to kind of document those SAR and no SAR decisions, which is excellent. That's great to hear. Something that can automate that is always a big win. 32% of our audience still using those spreadsheets and shared drives. 14% still using manual paper-based solutions, 4% using core tools, and only 1% reporting that they don't have a locked-in documentation process there. Kristen, I know you work with banks and credit unions across the spectrum in terms of processes. How does this kind of shake out to what you were thinking you'd see?
Yeah, I would say I am not shocked by how many people are still doing mostly manual or spreadsheets, because I've used before Risk Out, guys, I had the opportunity to use nearly every BSA system that existed out there. There was never, ever really a really good way to document your no SAR filings. And when you wanted to document why you did file a SAR, you had text boxes that were this small that were just not conducive for or human readable or functioning in a way that you could export well for your auditors and examiners. So I think it's not lost on me that stinks in most software. It does not stink in Risk Out because it was well thought out. I can tell you that. That's the beauty of being able to build a software you always wished you had when you were doing the job. But all that to be said is that there's not really ever been an effective way. So it's no shock to me that there's a lot of this still manual.
Well, tell us about it. Let's talk about documentation.
Okay. All right. I have to document everything. I have a real problem with this myth altogether, fundamentally, because I have been in BSA for 107 years at this point. And we've always been taught if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Well, that's the way our examiners have said stuff. That's the way our auditors have said stuff. That's been the sentiment this whole time. 2025, October 2025 guidance, which we actually go through. The webinar we did last month, maybe Ethan, you can pull that one up. There's one that we did last month that we go through part of it. We go through that 2025 guidance. If you're wondering what was on that, that would be a good one for you guys to check out. But part of it was, no, you actually don't really need to document that much stuff. And it says too that you don't have to document your reason for a no SAR. Now, however, I go back to what I said a couple slides ago. If you can't remember what you had for breakfast, how are you ever going to remember what and the reason why you did not file a SAR, or why you chose to file a SAR? So just know that it's not as there's a lot of gray area in it now. It's not as black and white. What they are trying to emphasize more than anything when I was talking to some regulators is that no, you don't need to write a whole novel. Save your novels for your complex cases. Everything else you decide to open a case on and not ultimately file a SAR, you can keep it really concise. And that's all goes back to all the risk-based decisioning commentary that we've had and been through of late, especially with the new proposed rule that's coming out, which says, we have the choice to run our programs as a risk-based decision. So however you want to document. Now, if you say, again, in your policies that you document everything thoroughly, then by God, you better still do it, because that's what your policy states you're doing, and that's board approved, and that's what you're going to get judged on when your examiners are in. But I never want you to ever write your policies like that. That's not practical. You always leave yourself wiggle room in your policies. However, just know you don't have to necessarily document whole storybooks worth of information anymore. You can just keep it clear and concise for yourself. Okay, law enforcement collaboration and strategic partnerships. This is what we had just touched on after we got that Q&A question. We did kind of touch on this a little bit, but joint task force are programs that combine FI and law enforcement resources to prevent, investigate, and prosecute financial crimes. These task forces are in almost every major city that exists out there. I would love to be able to identify all of them for everybody who's on this webinar, but you're going to have to do a little bit of research on your own. A lot of times, if you just call your local FBI or SBI or agency in or around in your state, they oftentimes will know. And if they don't know right away, they can find out for you. It is the case that the FBI and all the other law enforcement agencies as well are required to do some public education components a certain number of hours per year. That means they want to help you, because then they can check a box that they have been doing community outreach and education in this area. So just do yourself a solid, see what you can find. If you need help getting started, again, you can always reach out to me. I will do my best to be able to help you kind of figure out, especially if I already know within the area you're at, one that does exist. The whole point is be able to also create relationships that you can have a contact that you say, hey, don't cry wolf every time and be like, I'll file a SAR for every single SAR. But if you've got one that are around, especially things that are very pressing, that are maybe around cybersecurity, maybe that's around human trafficking, could be anything related to terrorist financing, anything that just your gut's like, I need to make sure this SAR is read. That is when you want to engage law enforcement. Have a contact. You can say, hey, John, I'm about to file a SAR here. You won't want to give them the details yet until the SAR is filed. Say, hey, I'm filing a SAR, looking for it from us. And once I hit send, I'll email you, let you know. They will read it. They will absolutely go and read it. And oftentimes they will tell you the outcome of that, right? I have the relationships I had, we had in the area I lived in and surrounding states that we served, there were concerns of human trafficking that were happening. We had a direct line to somebody that we say, hey, we believe that there is human trafficking happening. This is a scenario. I'm about to file a SAR. And then they would come back and say, yeah, I without a doubt, I would say 7 out of the 10 statistically would have something to do with human trafficking, that they would follow up and say, hey, we did investigate this. This did turn out to be actually XYZ, which actually closes that loop for you, so that you're not all, going through those motions of wondering, is this something that I am following this into a black hole for? They will also do the training and workshops as well in there. So again, because they are required to do some trainings, you can get them to come to your institution or get a conglomerate of institutions for them to come and train on what they're seeing. So just some final thoughts from my side of the house. I want you to question the lore. Just because you come in and the program's been ran a certain way and SARs have always been a certain way, doesn't mean that it's the right way. So just go back to the basics, go back to understanding why in your policies it says certain things, and does it have to be that way? You want to be able to free yourselves from whatever chains you've been hooked to in regards to just doing paperwork. And you want to take that time and that bandwidth to write very effective SARs. And if you don't need to be doing certain processes and procedures at your institution, and you've just been doing them because somebody says they're doing, but they aren't really that effective, that's the time to question it. And that's for everything BSA related, but especially when it comes to SARs. Just following this method to the madness, there are certain things that have to be done, but there doesn't have to be just a check the box activity. Lean on those 2025 frequently asked questions. Again, that's the memo that came out from FinCEN around SARs. I think it's important for you guys to take a read on that. Again, it is confusing. Some of it is confusing and contradictory of itself, but if you go back to the webinar, I think Ethan posted there, you'll be able to see that, the things that we did take away from it can be really helpful for your SAR program. Train your team on the truth, again, because just because things have been a certain way, help them seek out the truth too, and teach them how to do that. And a lot of times we just assume a situation is one way, and maybe we don't pick up the phone to call a teller who had an interaction with this elder person and to get, say, hey, Ethan, did Yoda spill any tea when he was doing this deposit? Because that may tell you a bigger part of the story that to ultimately determine what's something suspicious or not, and doesn't warrant even additional action outside of just filing a SAR, which would be contacting Adult Protective Services on behalf of the customer, or maybe their family if they're having issues with their money or things along those lines. So quality over quantity, baby. Take the time to really remember your 30 and 60 days you have to investigate something. Don't just file SARs for the sake of filing SARs to check a box. Your regulators don't like that either. Take the time. The more you take the time to do the investigation, you are telling yourself, okay, this is truly something suspicious, or it truly isn't. And the more quality you can provide them, the more effective you are, and you're not just sending in SARs to check a box that is clogging up the system. And you are not alone in the galaxy. There's support systems out here for helping kind of get advice from other folks. Would you file a SAR on this? Would you not file a SAR on this? Not giving all of the details that we're not allowed to share outside of our institution, but there are a lot of good networks that exist out there. Communities built within Risk Out. We have our own institutions that conversate with each other and kind of use each other to lean on, especially one-person teams. That's very, very important to do as well. A lot of times, if I was a one-person team, I would say, okay, I'm only looking at it through my lenses here. Let's get another person's opinion who's also educated in this space, kind of give me a different kind of credible challenge back to me. And that you're not alone either in regards to law enforcement and what you're trying to do, because you are there to help them. So go ahead and take the time to try to find the local task force in your area that you guys can join to get more education in this space.
All right, I think that brings us to Q&A. We've got one final poll question that we will pop up on the screen here. Take your time getting your responses in there. You can check as many or as few as you want. Just a good way for you to ask to get in touch with Kristen or myself or the larger Risk Out team if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what we do here to help banks and credit unions every day. We did have a couple of Q&A questions come in. I think we've got a little bit of time left. Kristen, you touched on this very, very lightly, but I want to see if you could maybe expand a little bit more. What is your thoughts and advice around using AI tools to help write SAR narratives?
Yeah, AI tools are great at helping you craft succinct narratives. You still absolutely need a human in the loop on that, so that you also need to coach that AI agent that you are using to be able to follow the same recipe that you have. AI tends to over embellish things quite a bit, right? And that's not the point of trying to write a good story. Doesn't mean you over embellish things. It means I'm telling you factual stuff you should pay attention to. And these are why I concluded something was suspicious. So a longer SAR narrative is not always an effective SAR narrative. So, the other important thing here is ensuring that whatever AI that you are utilizing is locked down and secure, guys, to your institution, that your data is not being shared to train the systems and all that. But SARs are confidential. So you need to make sure that you have whatever it is that you're using, whether it's Copilot or one of those, it is a license that it is this instance that you're using cannot be trained on, and this information is not shared outside of there. A lot of times what I see institutions do when they do use that is they're not actually putting the subjects' names in there. They're just saying, hey, this is a scenario of which happened. Help me write this story based off of these best practices. So sometimes we'll see folks feed, I've heard people say they feed our SAR narrative best practices into an agent and then say, hey, I want these stories, or I want this narrative written like this. And they don't give the actual details of the subjects in there. So it gives them a little, even if something is stated as private in AI, just be careful. So don't put your subjects' names in there.
Great answer there, Kristen. Thank you for that. One more in the Q&A. And again, if we didn't get time to answer your question, we'll follow up with y'all offline afterwards. We had somebody ask, they know in their gut that they've got a SAR in their hands. There's undoubtedly suspicious activity, but they're not sure exactly what it is. There are indicators that point to a mule account. It could be elder financial abuse. Maybe it's a check cashing ring or a romance scam. It's certainly suspicious, but I'm not sure how. How do I write my SAR narrative to still make it effective to law enforcement without 100% knowing what is happening in the bigger picture?
Yeah, absolutely. In your narrative, you say in the first two lines, we've got activity occurring in these accounts that indicate whatever you believe is happening. You don't have, it's not you're not law enforcement. You don't indefinitely know what's happening. You say, but based on the behavior in here, it is indicative of these 5 different subjects. And you don't need to explain what all those subjects mean, but below on the next paragraph or 2, you're saying this is why we believe it's check kind of, it could be these things, and then lay out that story like that afterwards. And then you have all those check boxes you can check on that, I believe, page 2 of the SAR, where it's just, check hiding elder abuse, all that. Check whatever you guys think it is, check it. Check that box and write it in your narrative. You don't have to know the whole story or the end conclusion here. You're just telling them what you believe it is based on the education you've been provided on what they're looking for.
Excellent. Well said there. Before we leave, do you want to plug that Kristen is on site in Charlotte at the ABA Risk and Compliance Conference at booth 317 all week. Kristen, anything you want people to drop by and chat with you about?
Yeah, come by, see us. I'll be there with Justin, our CEO. So it's always good to be able to say hi to both existing customers or those who are just curious about who we are and what we do. We got a lot of good treats at our booth, and we'd love to see you.
Excellent. That's right. We're always trying to take the BS out of BSA. Hopefully we got one step closer today. That is all of the time that we've got. Thank you all for joining us, and a big, big thank you to Kristen for sharing her time and expertise with us. You should keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending out the recording from today, the slides, all of the resources that we discussed. They'll be in your inbox first thing tomorrow morning. We also do have a brief survey following all of our webinars, so that should pop up when you close out. That's a chance for you to provide us with feedback, maybe ask for future webinar topics that you're interested in. Let us know if you want to get in touch. So please take a moment and let us know your thoughts there. And of course, if you do have any additional questions, if you want to learn more about Risk Scout, or if you just want to say hi to Kristen and myself, come find us at riskscout.com. And of course, may the force be with you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.